Let me just tell you this. Let me just tell you this. These are our elders. These are our scholars. And these gentlemen is the first of our teachers that helped us, struggle in this area. All right? Not taking nothing away from female scholars, but we wanted to identify some of the scholars that helped us move forward. All right? Can y'all deal with that for tonight?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Are you sure?
There's a woman out here.
Terry's a part of the library, and she's up there because Pierre's up there. But
because she's
still a scholar, in her own right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. We are here tonight to listen to three really good scholars to talk about some of the issues that has been concerning people of color since we got here. And they're going to make sense of it for us, for our community, for everyone. Okay? I don't want to speak too long. I'm going to turn it over to the MC, and they can take it from there. He's got a whole program that he will lay out for you. But welcome to the library. Oh, and by the way, there's a green bucket being held up.
Right.
This is grassroots, y'all. This is definitely grassroots. All right? Help us out. Thank you.
One thing, okay, when the wind blows, okay, the song is carried all over. The song of freedom is carried all over. That was the Indians' song. We learned at school because we were living where all the Indians were already decimated way before we were born. Yeah, so 1700 there was no more Indian. So we learned it at school. This song was an Indian song. People who supported the Indian movement, so they come up with that song. Okay, the big map you're seeing here is a map of the Haiti.
My fault.
There was five Kasika during the time of the Indians. They don't call it kingdom, they call it Kasika, after the name of the leaders. Yes. So what you're seeing here is the map of Haiti. Haiti wasn't divided until the colonial power, until the Spaniards came in, to the French, and they divided us. Yeah, okay. Actually, we consider the island as one people. They don't see it like that. There's still people who are fighting to get that island to be reunited, but we don't know. This never happened. Anyway, thank you.
Okay?
Want to sing it?
Yeah.
All right.
Pour le pays, pour le drapeau, mourir est beau, mourir est beau. Dans nos rangs, point de traite, du sol, soyons seuls maîtres. Mourir est beau, mourir est beau. Pour le pays, pour le drapeau. Mourir, mourir, mourir est beau. I can go right. 1803, when they make this song officially, Haiti national anthem. Okay, thank you.
I would be the MC tonight, and they say that there's two ways to grow older. One is to become an elder, the other is to become an older. We're fortunate tonight that we have a number of elders with us, and I include many people in the audience.
That's what the evening's called.
Another way to look at it is that we're still a generation that gets down. Unfortunately, it's a little more difficult to get back up again. Right, I knew I would get a response. Okay. So I'm delighted and honored to be here. We want to have a vigorous program of presentations about a very important set of topics. It's not just one thing. It's going to focus on a particular time in the history of the U.S. and the world. And we have perfect people to be discussing these topics here today. I'll introduce them one by one as we begin. I'm not going to take a lot of time with introductions. And what we want to do is have each of the speakers speak for a maximum of 1/2 hour. Several have assured me they will go shorter than that, but I will be here to be sure they will not go longer than that. But the reason is we want to have as much time as possible for questions and discussion at the end. So we want to leave at the very minimum a 1/2 hour for that. And we also plan a series of talks that will grow out of this, a series of discussions that will grow out of this, that we plan to call Know Your History, Know Your Destiny. And I think now is a very fruitful time to be having this kind of discussion in the U.S. and the world. So much is happening, and so many people are being activated, many for the first time. So we want to have this as an opportunity to contribute some positive direction to a new movement. Now, the way history is typically taught is that it's a straight line leading to the great USA, that it's a straight line that has led to the USA becoming the greatest democracy in the world and a beacon of light to the world. I will be. The purpose of tonight is, among other things, to give real history rather than that, because that's the way it's typically taught. And, you know, the thing is that it's clear, I think, to most people here and to most people everywhere, that everything is not just fine. So tonight we're going to hear about a time when the future of the U.S. looked indeed dark. There was a threat of a possible Indian war combined with a slave rebellion in a period when the Spanish were still a formidable power on the continent. And the entire US project was actually called into question. Most people don't realize this, and most people don't recognize it, and some people don't even want to hear about it. But this is the real history of what was going on. And we have four extraordinary presenters to help us get a grip on this remarkable period in the history of this country and the history of the world. So we're going to start first with the Haitian Revolution. Thank you for the music and for the singing. The Haitian Revolution is one of the great events in U.S. and world history. The only slave rebellion that successfully took power. It defeated the most enormous and powerful army in the world, Napoleon, something no one else had done, in order to win the Haitian Revolution. And to begin this discussion with the Haitian Revolution, we have Terry and Pierre Leroy. That's the correct pronunciation.
I was afraid he'd go Leroy.
And to begin to tell us a bit about the history of Haiti and how it connects to all of this.
I'm really just, can people see me because I'm tiny? I can stand up. I'm so tiny, so I'm just really setting the stage for Pierre, who really is the Haitian history expert. But Haitians, even today, and freedom-loving people around the world are fiercely proud that a band of slaves was able to defeat Napoleon Bonaparte's army. Napoleon was the biggest dictator in the world at the time. He sent, in order to keep his tentacles in the island of Hispaniola, he sent his brother-in-law, his sister was Pauline, he sent his brother-in-law Leclerc, and Leclerc arrived with 25,000 troops and 70 warships. Leclerc died in the process of all this. The Haitian slaves waged a protracted struggle, a lot of twists and turns, and on January 1st, 1804, the first Black Republic in the world was created, and this was the first and only truly successful slave rebellion that kicked out colonial powers and saw the birth of a new nation. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm going to have Paul ask Pierre some questions. So how did this all happen? It's such an amazing story, really. Why don't you move forward?
Actually, you cannot forget the Indians. The Indians put a fierce resistance to the Spaniards, and they were the one really to protect the indigenous people when they came in before they were completely how do you say that? Massacred, decimated by the Spaniards. So the few Indians that stayed in Haiti, Arawak Indians and Tainos, okay, they were helping the African slaves, okay, to survive by hiding them and by helping them to fight And that's the reason why in 1804, after Jean-Jacques Dessalines, one of the Haitian black leaders, who was considered as the father of the George Washington of Haiti. Okay, actually, to put it like that. Okay, that's the reason why Jean-Jacques Dessalines was the father of the Haitian independence. He renamed Saint-Domingue, which was the French name for the island. He renamed it Haiti, which was the Indian Arawak name for Haiti, which means land of mountains. As a matter of fact, when Christopher Columbus landed in 1492 in Haiti, and then the Spaniards, the king of Spain was asking, what did you see? What he did in order to describe Haiti, he took a piece of paper. He took a piece of paper and folded it like that, and he said, it's the most mountainous place I haven't seen in my whole life. So that was Haiti, yeah, that Haitian part. There was a flat part, which is now the Dominican Republic, but the whole island is considered, was only one. If you look at that map there, it was never divided. It was only one island. The colonialists came and divided into. So, I'm sorry, I have a breathing problem, so I'm going to take a break. Get some water. I answer your question.
Can you tell us a bit about how the organization of slaves began with Toussaint and what's his name?
Bookman. Before.
Tell us a bit about the origins.
Talk right into the mic.
Most people know about Toussaint, but not too many people heard about Bookman. Okay, Bookman was born not in Haiti, but he was born in Jamaica. Yeah, he was the Jamaican who came to Haiti as a slave, but he never really stayed in slavery. He was always a maroon. He was always in the mountains. So Bookman actually organized a gathering in 1791. Yeah, a gathering of the slaves right in the middle of the wood in northern Haiti, my hometown, outside of my hometown, and he asked all the slaves who want to stay in slavery to get out, and those who want to fight for their liberation to stay there and fight with him. So Bookman had an overwhelming response, and that's how they start burning the plantation. And it was a very violent thing, because the Frenchman was violent. So these people, they knew nothing, but they were victims of violence by the French people. So the Bookman organized that revolt. And he was very successful until he was caught, and they took his head. But the struggle continued with Toussaint Louverture, who was, most people know, was educated as a black leader, and it was called the Black Napoleon. He was naturally gifted for war strategy and stuff. Okay, the art of war. Anyway, Toussaint Louverture took over with his Lieutenant Dessalines, and then they get together with Christophe, another Haitian leader. The three of them get together, and then they brought the affranchis, which used to be called mulatto, but we don't like that name mulatto. We call them free men, free mixed men, free mixed men. There were about 60,000 free mixed persons. These people half French and half black who joined the movement, and they get together because prior to that, they were defeated. Every time they started an uprising, they were defeated prior to that. But when they get together with the slave, they became successful. The black slave, they became successful, and that's how in 1804 they beat the French army of Napoleon.
Right, how Toussaint got tricked.
Yeah, right. Anyway, before the independence was declared, Toussaint was called to a peace meeting by Napoleon, but it was a trap. It wasn't really a peace meeting. It was a trap. And imagine that guy had 72 ships or 76, 70 ships. Warships, plus a lot of soldiers who were very skilled fighting for war in Europe. They were very skilled, but they rounded up Toussaint. And he was caught by surprise. Otherwise, they would fight, but which they did anyway. Toussaint was taken prisoner and sent in France, where he died in a dungeon in the cour of Montjura, in the dungeon in France. So Dessalines and Christophe, his lieutenant, say, well, we're not going to sit down no more with the French and talk peace. We're going to go straight to another uprising, to insurrection, and we're going to have the war of independence. They get together with the free mixed people, which was called mulattoes at that time, which we don't like the name, because mulatto has a connotation of mule. It's a derogatory name. It's a mixed people of half French and half Haitian. So they'll get together and they make a united front. And right outside of my hometown, they defeated the stronger army of the 18th century, which was the French army of Napoleon. And as a matter of fact, some of the big names in that army, like Rochambeau, there were war heroes here in this country. They came here to fight for George Washington, and they became war heroes here. But for our country, Haiti, they were the villains, they were the bad guys. So anyway, they were defeated, and that's how we took over. We gave independence to Haiti. I wasn't there. And I know the story. We live up to this thing, just like for the Indians. I wasn't there either. But we sang the song of the Indian, and we feel so that in our blood, the Indians are still present. In our spirit, they're still there. Okay. So, anybody? Question?
Oh, I think you said at the end. Okay. So, obviously, this was not very popular in certain parts of the world. Not very popular in the United States, which took a long time to recognize Haiti. But the repercussions of Napoleon's defeat affected us tremendously, not just in the future slave revolts. I'm sure AJ might be talking about how Nat Turner was influenced by the knowledge of the Haitian Revolution. But it forced Napoleon to give up his holdings in the New World. So the Louisiana Purchase, which increased the size of our nation tremendously, doubled it, was a result of the Haitian people's victory, the Haitian slaves.
I also want
They
to.
do need a woman up there.
The people should also know that Pierre and Terry are the founders of the Haitian People Support Project, which has been raising funds for Haiti. One of the things that happened was that Haiti is still resented by the white rulers of the United States. And so the treatment of Haiti remains utterly despicable today. And when catastrophes befall Haiti, the United States has has not done anything like what should be done to help people there. But the Haitian People Support Project, I know, if you give money to them, it goes to Haiti, unlike some other organizations I won't get into. I will not get into that right now. In any case, it's a known fact that a lot of these organizations feather their own nests first. So the Haitian People Support Project, I believe you have some material for that.
Yes,
here.
I don't know where they put it, but it's here, sign up,
On the
literature.
tables in the back.
So next, we have the distinguished emeritus professor from SUNY New Paltz, Professor A.J. Williams-Myers, who has been kind enough to lend his name to this library and who's been an inspiration to many of us for a long time,
Right.
talking about exactly what Terry introduced, the idea of the slave rebellions in the United States that were ubiquitous. There was just a constant threat, at least of slave rebellions, and many slave rebellions that took place.
Nevertheless, let me just say that in terms of Haiti, it was, shall we say, it was the end result of a revolution, which came out of an evolution, meaning essentially Africans in the Americas, as enslaved people, created a movement in terms of resistance that ended up with, shall we say, they peaked with Haiti, meaning the revolution. A book you want to hold on to and read, which is very helpful to this, and that is Eugene Genovese's book. Came out in the 80s, and it's called From Rebellion to Revolution, in terms of the making of the Americas. It is that Africans as a whole went through a process, wherever they were, moving from, shall we say, primary resistance and creating maroonage, or escaping to, shall we say, the swamps, resistance in any fashion, to where they were able to, shall we say, overcome ethnicity. I'm in a Khan, you're a Cormanti, but we are both resisting an institution that to us, is hell, created by our fellow human beings. So we want to talk about tonight an institution, or shall we say, a devilish institution, created by our fellow human beings for the express purpose of creating wealth on the backs of those who were of a different color, or shall we say, quote unquote, so-called race of human beings. Slavery was hell, and Africans resisted from the very time they were captured in the interior to the march to the coast. Because as I always tell my students, there's only 10% of Africa which is at sea level. The rest of Africa is simply rises to enormous heights. So we get to, shall we say, what? In East Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro, over what? 26,000 feet. So which means essentially is that the march from the interior to the coast, Africans resisted, by fleeing or even attacking their captors, in this case, right? Basically. We know for a fact that they resisted even on the ships that they were put in the bowels of ships. There's a movie that was made called The Amistad. Remember that?
Yes.
In the waters of New England, we're not going. So the point is, Africans never gave up. They never gave up. They passed this on to their children. So we see this on ships. By the time they arrived on mainland, shall we say the Americas, it was the same thing. Now, if you look at the book that I call From Rebellion to Revolution, Eugene Genovese sets up a nice scale for us to look at. Because once they arrive in the Americas, the object is, let's flee our captors, let's flee our enslavement. And they would flee to the interior, swamps to the mountains, and create what we call maroonage, become maroons in this case. Or they created their own little African kingdoms. And I'll say this very quickly, one of the longest African kingdoms that existed was in Brazil, called Palmares. It lasted for the extent of the 1600s, the 17th century. It took the Dutch and the Spaniards to put it down, or the Portuguese to put it down. Follow what I'm saying? Because it was so powerful. But that was a state, unfortunately, that turned its back or was not ready for what we call the bourgeoisie democratic revolution, which is what Haiti got into, drew us into that, right? The bourgeoisie democratic revolution, which is what the Europeans were doing, in essence. And Nat Turner, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about. Nat Turner came on the heels, shall we say, of the Haitian Revolution, because that revolution simply reverberated throughout the Americas. All of us, as enslaved people, said, we want to be like the Haitians. We want to be like Toussaint Louverture. We want to be like Borkman, you see, who was a ritual specialist, which we also had them here in the Americas. You want to look at Demarc Vesey, you know, in South Carolina. He had what we call Gullah Jack, you know, a Gullah, who were from the Congo, Gullah people. But he was a ritual specialist that prayed to the gods, you know, as we call them in Malawi, you know, Malungu, Buenanikunu, Kutanizani. Come to help us. Give us help, in essence, you see. So, the point to be made here is that Nat Turner, again in 1831, because he had, shall we say, been moved by a sun, right? An eclipse of the sun, and felt that he was chosen to lead his people to freedom. But subsequent to 1791, the Haitian Revolution, he was simply one of many. His was one of many. Because in that area, as I mentioned, Demarc Vesey, right? 22. And then there's Gabriel Prosser, 1800. These are simply three of the rebellions, of the resistance. Africans were determined to take from the Europeans, to rip from the Europeans their own, shall we say, liberty. If you will not give it to us, we will take it. Because what you must understand is that during slavery, throughout the period of enslavement, Africans and Europeans were on a war footing, which meant that if you relax, we're going to take you out. If you go to sleep at night, you better take guns, swords with you. We're going to take you out. You see? And it wasn't just men. It was women. There was one enslaved woman who was so upset, who wanted her freedom. She said, I'm going to take my freedom. I'm going to start by what? Taking what is mine. So she goes to the barn and she slits the throats of all the cows and horses. There. That's the beginning of my freedom. Those cows, those horses, is as a result of my care. Because women work like men. You know, you were female, but nevertheless, they work you to death. You know, or women killing other women. I'm an enslaved woman. You're an enslaved white woman. How dare you? See, they never accepted the enslavement. Never accepted enslavement. There is a book called American Negro Slavery by U.B. Phillips. It is a white-oriented view of slavery. And then in a sense that slavery was not bad. We took care of Africans. Africans needed to be cared for. You see. They didn't create civilization. Egypt was not theirs. Egypt was ours. But if you look at the language, linguistically, there's no way you can say that African, that is the Egyptian language, you know, was, ancient Egyptian, was Indo-European. There is no immediate connection to Indo-European. It is African in this case, right? And that those pharaohs, and I don't carry away to the extent, those were Africans who created what we, to an extent, know as physics, mathematics, you see? But they were doing it for all of us. We were a part and parcel of that, right? Let me just say very quickly, in terms of Nat's rebellion. By the time we get into, you know, November, before he's captured, he's killed over 60 whites. The first person that he killed were his owner, right? Killed his owner, Turner, and his family, and his daughters, and his wife. They spared no one, you see. Not that they wanted to do this, I mean, that is, not that they said, well, they're human beings. They were killing what they thought was the, shall we say, the disease. And that is that racism, that ethnocentrism, the idea of us and not them, as opposed to we, the human race, in this case. He was eventually caught in October, but in November, they hanged him. But he was only 24 years old. But he knew what he needed to do, and he did it. And all those who were with him. I want to read two pieces for you before I sit down. One is an eyewitness statement, account of an African who was to be taken to the gallows, or beheaded or what. This is what he says. And the other is, no doubt, the conclusion section of Urban Apteker. So let me read the section for you very quickly. That's what he says. I'll take my second set of eyes. Quote, as he told his killers eventually. I have nothing more to offer than what George Washington would have had to offer, had he been taken by the British officers and put to trial by them. I have ventured my life in endeavoring to obtain the liberty of my countrymen, and I am a willing sacrifice to their cause. And I beg as a favor that I may be immediately led to the execution. I know that you have predetermined to shed my blood. Why then follow this mockery of a trial? Unquote. And finally, Herbert Apteker, from his book, Essays in History of American History, the American Negro. This is what he says, very quickly. American slavery was a barbarous tyranny. It impoverished the land and the common people. Negro and white of the South tore away their freedom and attempted to destroy the liberty of all American citizens. Keep in mind now, poor white citizens are people allied themselves with Africans and also resisted. His history, however, is not merely one of impoverishment, deprivation, and oppression, for embedded in the record of American slavery is the inspiring story of the persistence and courageous efforts of the Negroes, aided not infrequently by poor whites, to regain their heritage of liberty and equality, to regain their right to the elemental demands of human beings. Let me just say very quickly in concluding, he talked about whites allying themselves with Africans. This is from the very beginning. You all heard of what? The Bacon Rebellion, Nathaniel Bacon. Now when I was coming up, Nathaniel, in that rebellion were all white people. But if you look at it, indentured servitude, for all what it's made up to be, to have been, was slavery.
That's right.
Follow what I'm saying? But some of the first Africans who arrived ended up being indentured servants as well. It's not until that rebellion of 1679, in which Africans and Europeans allied themselves to overthrow the system. I mean, they joined with Nathaniel, even though he was a landed aristocracy. He wanted the Burgess, Virginia Burgesses, to expand into Native American land. And actually, so they used that as a means by which to give expression to their oppression. This has always been the case. Whites have always joined with fellow human beings, despite the color, despite what they look like, or quote unquote race. If they're oppressed, we will join together to, shall we say, to undo what has happened to us. Because we are all human beings. Thank you.
This is the name of our library, A.J. Williams Myers. Thank you very much. And last and certainly not least, another retired professor from Professor Airy Dixon, Pierre Dixon.
Pardon me for not standing. Arthur has come to visit me. And I know I can get an amen. Thank you, man. Okay. Well, Paul started his story, the conference, on the pitfalls of so-called American history. I remember as a kid in school listening to all this tripe, and it was so at variance of my lived experience, and I understood it for what it was. But I think I was smart enough to know to go along with the game so I could reach a certain point of acquiring the education, then I would be free to say what I want to say, and people couldn't shout me down by saying you don't know what you're talking about. Okay? It's something that the Chinese call stoop in order to conquer. And so this whole idea of what was being taught was more manifest destiny, as Paul alluded to in his opening remarks. I've identified a frame of reference which is helpful, and this panel is an illustration of that. And it was inspired by a French historian by the name of Ferdinand Braudel. It's called The Mediterranean. And he talked about the Mediterranean world, because we've been taught to think that rivers and waterways are dividers of people. But if you saw the movie or maybe even read the novel, it's a river runs through it. The rivers, waterways were the main arteries of communication and transportation in the world. So if Braudel could take this notion of the Mediterranean as a unit to study it, I could go on about that, but we don't have time to go into that. Another frame of reference that's interesting and important is called the Atlantic world. Okay? The Atlantic world, which the continents that border on the Atlantic world, Europe, Africa, South America, and North America. And to see this as a unit. And the purpose of this panel is to show the linkages of what happens when people are taken away from their homelands. And I have to say that the scholarship of late has greatly improved. And it's being driven by women scholars. Some of the best things that I've been reading of late have been written by women, because there was a whole part of the history which was left out. Men writing from a male perspective, and they left out the women, and the women scholars are now completing that. So this notion of a manifest destiny, in my view, is on very shaky grounds. Now, we talk about Haiti, okay? I have a personal connection with Haiti. I have a nephew that was born in Haiti. So I have in-laws, I have family in Haiti, all part of the Atlantic world. And so I say to Pierre, whenever we meet, Papa Legba loué la veillée pour moi. Okay? That is to Papa Legba, who was at the crossroads, to open the way so I could go. And Pierre, in the conversation we had, he said this is what people were singing as they went to fight. They were singing to their African gods. Now, if you think they were living, fighting, praying to the Christian gods, they could have never been free. And we must never underestimate the power of what people believe. And so when they were saying, Papa Leva, Louis la veillée pour moi, that is open the way, and that will explain a lot of things. Now, in the native tradition, it's the women who are most important, because they are the sustainers of life. And they tell you who your relatives are, okay? And that is very important to know. Racism divides families. Now we can talk about plantation fathers who are selling their own children for profit. Talk about deadbeat dads. Okay? That is an abominable sin for a man to sell his own flesh and blood, but then at the same time pretend that they're not human. Well, if they're not human, he's engaged in bestiality. Okay? So all of these come back to haunt you. Now, Haiti declared itself republic 1804. 1808, the U.S. passed a law abolishing the transatlantic slave trade. Now, they didn't do that because they loved Africans, but they were facing a real fear about being outnumbered. South Carolina, great book by Peter H. Woods, The Black Majority of South Carolina. If there's one book you read, in addition to what AJ suggested, I suggest you read that. And they were realizing that in South Carolina, whites were a minority. Okay? Now, I was just reading a piece before I came here about their historians of fear. And we talk about these things, we have to talk about fear. A lot of what we see in racism is driven by fear. There's a line in the motion picture, Beckett, it says, one fears those who one wrongs. So if I do you wrong, I've got to be fearful of you, because if the tables are ever turned, I cannot expect mercy because I didn't give you mercy.
Wait, let's pause.
And so this idea of fear of black majority, and then tied to another fear.
I'm dying with a Bernie sticker.
There it is. And this fear was coupled. Okay.
Everybody's got Bernie stickers. What the hell do you mean?
Stop.
Okay.
What happened to your Bernie sticker?
In America, they were faced with a double whammy. They were fearful of the people who were being held against their will. Now, to illustrate that, one of the most dangerous jobs in America is to be a prison guard. See, because when you drive people against the wall, and they feel that they have nothing to lose, and that's why our fight on terrorism is so difficult, because when one is willing to die for a purpose, what leverage do you hold over that person? Not much. So there was internal fear. Then on the borders were the Indians. That was an external fear. And the fear is, if these two groups ever got together again, okay, they would be toast. And these fears were realized in the Seminole Wars. Okay? Now, history written by the victors, they don't talk about this. Okay? There was a gag order in Congress against talking about slavery and the abolition. Now, freedom of speech, First Amendment, didn't mean very much when it conflicted with economic interests. And I will further say that economic rights superseded human rights. Okay?
That's America.
Okay? Now, and I want to give you an example of that. Okay? If you were someone's slave, you were better protected than if you were free. A free person. Okay? Because they respected more the institution of slavery, which were property rights, over human rights.
Still do.
Yes, exactly. So here we have this Haitian rebellion, it breaks out, and the news traveled like wildfire, because another underexplored area of so-called American history is the role of Negro seamen. So you never hear about that. You get a glimpse of it in the motion picture Moby Dick. But large number of the seamen from the U.S. were both Native American and African American. Okay, but you see the movies, everybody is what? Really white. Not true. Okay, there were rivers. The book that Paul lent me, Walter Johnson, talks about the Mississippi. Another book that I read talked about the Savannah River. Lots of those rivers, the people who plied the trade were African Americans, they are not only the captains, they were also owners of those boats, and those rivers were free territory. Okay? People were traveling up and down those rivers, and no one bothered them, as long as they kept a low profile. And so there was those avenues of freedom. Now that was important for the so-called Underground Railroad, the movement of people by water. Okay. Now we get to the Seminoles, which is my topic. You gotta warm them up. Okay. Okay. Now the interesting thing about the Seminoles, and it's like this. Where did the word come from? I'm interested in language. Well, the word originally came from the Spanish cimarrones, which means, cima in Spanish means the top. Okay? You add on as a suffix, it means ugly. So cimarrones was first applied to livestock that was feral, that ran away, the cattle. And since slaves were considered livestock, it was then applied to runaway slaves. Okay? Now the English come along and they corrupt the word cimarron to maroon. Now, okay, now cimarrone, then the Creek Indians picked up on this concept, because people don't realize that the cattle industry not started in Texas, but in Georgia by the Spanish. Remember the Spanish bullfighters? Well, you have to have a big cattle industry to support the bulls. That's where you get the bulls from, you see. And so the Creek Indians became cattle herders. And so they picked up the word cimarrones as cimalones because they don't have an R in their language. And then some of their people were breaking away from their confederacy because they were minorities. See, the Creeks were not homogeneous people. They had taken in a lot of people. They had conquered some people. They had threatened some people, and so they were lording it over some people. The original Hichichi speakers and the Muskogee speakers who came on the top, and so these people wanted to get away from the Muskogees, and since they had cleared out northern Florida, South Carolina, in the Indian raids, which is another topic that I'm working on, and that's why a lot of African American people will tell you they have Native American ancestry. And people will poo-poo them and say that's not true. And one is a scholar who's on TV all the time, doing genealogy, who doesn't know first thing about genealogy. Okay, because you had Indians, the first slaves in Virginia were Indians. And Indian slavery never ended. It peaked around the time of the Yamasee War, about 1750, where the Indian coalition almost drove the South Carolinians into the sea. And so the Indian slave trade went from wholesale to retail, but it never ended. They had another big surge of Indian slavery surrounding the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which coincided with the Nat Turner Rebellion. And then there was a third whammy, that was the disenfranchisement of free people of color. So you see all these forces that are coming together. So the Hichiti people broke away and went into Florida, and so the Muskogee overlords said, oh no, these are just runaways. They're cimarrones. And so then they're joined by the people you might call maroons, and so you have Seminole and maroon, although they don't seem like it, come from the same root and they have the same significance. Now the Seminoles were, they don't even use the word for themselves, because they say Seminole is applied to wild animals and wild plants, and not to be applied to people. But the Americans are very famous for misnaming people, giving people the most derogatory names they could find. They go to one tribe, which is the enemy of another tribe, and say, who are these people? The gut eaters, the dog eaters, the stinkers. Okay? Never ask the people themselves who they call themselves. And if you ask the people themselves who they call themselves, they say us. Okay? Our people. It makes sense. Someone asked, well, how did the Indians call America before the Europeans come? Ours. Okay? It makes all the sense in the world. So the people who we call Seminoles, they welcome the so-called Maroons because they knew that the Americans and this man whose name shall live in infamy, Andrew Jackson, okay, Andrew Jackson, went on a slave raid. See, because the fear now, Indians and blacks are together, Haiti is free, and if they can't control Florida, they're going to bring in troops from the West Indies and go through the whole South and do away with the institution of slavery. Now, what happens was General Jessup was very smart, very cagey. He sought to divide in order to conquer. So in the middle of the Second Seminole War, he said, no, this is not an Indian war, it's a Negro war. Now what were the consequences of that? Why did he say that? Well, because Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, had all had their Indian wars. This was in, I'm talking about 1835. The Indian Removal Act was in effect. And so, except for the Seminoles, the Indian problem had just about been solved. They thought that the Seminole Wars would be a simple mopping up exercise. Little did they know. And so the Virginians, when they were asked for help, they said, no, we fought the Powhatans, and we fought our Indian War. Go to North Carolina, well, we fought the Tuscaroras, and we fought our Indian wars. They go to South Carolina and says, we fought the Yamasees, and so we won our Indian war. And they go to Georgia, well, we're fighting the Creeks. And so Florida, you've got your own Indian wars, you're all on your own.